Get that feeling where you just know a deep dive is going to be a good one. Well, buckle up, because today we're talking Forrest Gump, a movie that, much like life itself, it's kind of more than just a box of chocolates, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a film that's kind of woven itself into our cultural fabric. And we're going to unpack why this story about a man who witnesses like all the major events of the late 20th century still hits so hard, even decades later.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
It's 1994. That's when Forrest Gump hit theaters, right in the heart of the 90s. Which, if you think about it, the world was a totally different place back then. What comes to mind when you think about that era?
Oh man, 94. It was a time of massive change, really. I mean, you had the internet sort of starting to, become a thing people knew about. The Berlin Wall had just fallen a few years earlier. So globally, there was this sense of like huge shifts happening.
Yeah.
Like a real where were you when kind of period.
Totally.
And I'm curious, how did those massive like global events trickle down into everyday life back then?
Well, in America specifically, you had this interesting thing happening. On the one hand, the early 90s, it was a boom time economically, like a lot of optimism.
Right.
But underneath that, there were these anxieties bubbling up, worries about jobs going overseas, that whole thing. And of course, the AIDS epidemic was still very much part of the national conversation.
So you've got this backdrop of uncertainty, but also possibility,
Yeah, exactly. Which I think makes it even more interesting to consider why Forrest Gump, a story about, let's face it, a pretty pure-hearted guy with a simple way of looking at the world, why it resonated so much then.
Absolutely. And it wasn't shying away from tough stuff either.
Right.
But it did so with this real heart, and this sense of hope, I think, that really struck a chord.
It did. It's almost like with all that complexity going on in the world, Forrest's journey offered people a kind of comfort.
I think you're right. A little bit of like things will work out kind of feeling.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got this backdrop of change, uncertainty, and then this film comes along that's both heartwarming, but also it sparks some serious conversations.
Yeah.
Let's dig into that a little more. I mean, it's not every day a movie snags 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture.
Right. Talk about cleaning up.
Seriously. And even beyond the awards buzz, Forrest Gump really got people talking about, well, some pretty heavy stuff, mental health being a big one.
Oh, absolutely. And back then, it wasn't as common to like openly discuss mental health the way we do now. But there Forrest was on the big screen navigating his own unique challenges.
It's true. And they never put a label on it,
Yeah.
which I think is part of what made it so powerful.
Exactly. It allowed people to connect with the story on their own terms. It opened up the space for empathy and understanding without feeling preachy or judgmental.
Yeah, exactly. And that ties into another big theme that I think resonated with audiences, that whole idea of childhood innocence.
Forrest's worldview, yeah.
Yeah, like here's this guy facing down some of the most like intense moments of the 20th century, but he approaches it all with this, I don't know, this refreshing simplicity.
It's funny, right? Because on the one hand, you could see it as naivete, but there's also this real strength in it. Like, Forrest just keeps going no matter what life throws his way.
It's true. And it's interesting to think about that in the context of the 90s, a time of such rapid change. I could see how people might have craved that kind of steadiness.
Totally. It's like amidst all the uncertainty and complexity, Forrest Gump offered this vision of resilience, this idea that, yeah, life can be messy and unpredictable, but we keep moving forward.
And it's not just about getting through the tough stuff alone, right?
Exactly. I mean, look at Forrest's relationships with Bubba, Lieutenant Dan. They go through some serious trials together.
They do, but those bonds, the friendships, they're what help them survive.
Absolutely. They highlight the importance of connection, of having people there for you no matter what. And I think that message, that sense of community, resonated deeply with audiences.
It makes you realize those human connections, they're kind of like the life rafts that keep us afloat,
Yeah.
especially during those stormy times.
Couldn't have said better myself.
So we've talked about the cultural impact, those bigger themes.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, even if someone hasn't seen Forrest Gump, they've probably quoted it at some point.
Oh, 100%. I mean, come on. Life is like a box of chocolates.
Exactly. It's become part of our everyday language. But beyond the catchphrases, Forrest Gump did something really interesting with its storytelling. The way it wove together real-life historical events with this fictional character, it was pretty groundbreaking.
It really was. I mean, you've got Forrest shaking hands with presidents, influencing major cultural moments. It's historical fiction done right. Entertaining, but also it makes you think.
It does make you think. And speaking of groundbreaking, did you know that the special effects in Forrest Gump were revolutionary for their time?
Oh, tell me about it. I mean, the way they seamlessly inserted Tom Hanks into archival footage, letting him interact with historical figures, it was mind-blowing back then.
It's true. Seeing Forrest shake hands with presidents and influence major events, it added this crazy layer of believability to the story.
Right, like you're almost watching a documentary at some points.
Totally. And we just sort of accept it because the technology is so good.
It's something we almost take for granted now, but back then it was mind-blowing. And it really speaks to the film's lasting legacy. Forrest Gump didn't just tell a great story, it pushed the boundaries of what was possible in filmmaking.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, did you know that Tom Hanks wasn't the first choice for the role of Forrest?
Really? No way.
Yeah, it's true. Can you even imagine anyone else bringing that character to life?
It's wild to think about. Who else were they considering?
Well, John Travolta was in the running for a while, and even Bill Murray.
Bill Murray. Wow, talk about a different vibe.
Right. It makes you wonder how those casting choices would have impacted the film's overall tone and reception. But there's one element that I think gets overlooked when we talk about Forrest Gump, and that's the music.
Oh, the soundtrack is amazing. So many classic tracks on there.
Right. Fortunate Son, for what it's worth, those iconic songs weren't just background music. They were carefully chosen to evoke specific emotions and historical context, adding this whole other layer to the storytelling.
Totally agree. Like when they use Fortunate Son during the Vietnam scenes, it's just perfect. You instantly get that sense of the era, the anti-war sentiment, all of it.
Exactly. It's like the music is its own character, shaping how we experience those pivotal moments in the film.
Yeah.
You know, for a movie set against such a tumultuous backdrop, it's fascinating how Forrest Gump manages to find moments of humor, beauty, and even peace. Like that iconic scene on the bench at the bus stop. I heard the bench is a real place in Savannah, Georgia.
Get out of here. Really?
Yep. Apparently it's become a bit of a tourist attraction.
That's wild. I had no idea.
It just goes to show you the power of this film, right? How it's seeped into our culture in these unexpected ways.
It really does. It's more than just a movie. It's an experience.
Well said. Well, there you have it, our deep dive into Forrest Gump, a film that continues to resonate with audiences decades later. We covered a lot of ground today, from the historical context of its release to those groundbreaking special effects and, of course, that unforgettable soundtrack. But more than anything, I think Forrest Gump reminds us of the power of storytelling.
Absolutely. And how even a simple story, told well, can stay with us long after the credits roll.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining me on this journey back to 1994. And who knows, maybe the next time you're feeling a little lost in life, you find yourself thinking, what would Forrest do?
Huh. I might just do that.
Until next time, happy watching.